What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today I added Arnim Zola into Deadpool Destroy. This is my updated list. I cut Death from Deadpool Destroy. There's a few reasons for that I'll talk about throughout the video, but the first reason is that this is the deck that I played with Altar of Death as the featured location. So this was the deck that I played most of yesterday. I struggled a little bit at the start of the day to figure out exactly what I wanted to play, but this is eventually what I settled on. And a Reddit user commented on my post yesterday, user Ybot, to say they've currently been playing the deck Deathless because there's so much Mobius on the ladder, and I felt that to be true as well. Death was often just left stuck in my hand because my opponents have had Mobius, and that meant that just Death is uncastable. So it feels a little bit awkward for Altar of Death's featured location to not be playing Death itself, but I felt like that fit. And Arnim Zola was a card that I was looking to play because a lot of other people played in the deck, and it helps you high roll even further, especially in those mirror matches, which I thought was super important. I'm snapping on turn 3 because I don't think my opponent is going to be able to fill White Hot Room this turn, and if we can fill White Hot Room ourselves, then we'll be able to grab enough energy to play Knull and then play Arnim Zola on that Knull on the final turn of the game. And Onslaught Citadel is also going to have us, or help us rather, to have a massive Knull. One thing that was important to me was finding a deck list that I could play even when Altar of Death didn't show up in the game, something that I still felt was pretty cohesive, which is why I only changed one card in the list. And I'm pretty happy with this deck, and that's why we are first looking to get at a game without Altar of Death, though all 3 of the other games in this video are going to feature Altar of Death, and they're going to be some pretty fun ones with some other fun things to talk about. But this turn, so my opponent used Spider-Man to move over Deadpool, and X-23 flipped over into Onslaught Citadel, so now I don't have a great location to throw this Knull, which is pretty awkward. However, I do realize that I do still have an out here, and there is a way to more or less guarantee that I'll be able to Arnim Zola my Knull, and that is by using Killmonger next turn to blow up X-23, and then Knull will be alone by itself, unless of course the X-23 lands in the Deadpool location again, which is always possible. I think about blowing up the Venom with Deathlok, but ultimately decide to blow up Deadpool, and then my opponent moves Deadpool one more time with Polaris, which is a little bit awkward, but if I draw Killmonger here, I'll still be able to blow up both X-23 and Deadpool, and I'll have the energy to play both Killmonger and Arnim Zola because of White Hot Room. I do draw the Killmonger, so now I just have to basically dodge the 1 and 3 that X-23 lands back in Onslaught Citadel, and if I don't, then I have to dodge the 50-50 that Arnim Zola still hits Knull. So pretty good odds, I think, to still win this game. I like throwing Knull in the Citadel to start, because then it has some bonus power. It'll go up to, it'll get +8 here, so it'll go up to 22, and then it will go 33 power in both of the other locations, which should be enough to win it. Magneto does not affect me because I have filled up the Citadel, and we are going to be able to blow up these cards with Killmonger. Unfortunately, the X-23 does land back into Onslaught Citadel, and double unfortunate, we hit the 1 and 6 that Arnim Zola hits X-23, but that's actually enough to still get the win in the White Hot Room, despite everything going wrong there. So I thought this was a really funny game to kick things off with. But now we're going to take a look at some Altar of Death games, and that game was like kind of interesting because White Hot Room still gave me the excess energy to be able to play everything that I wanted to play, whereas otherwise you are typically going to rely on destroying your X-23 on turn 4, so that way you can play a turn 5 Knull, and then you can play a turn 6 Arnim Zola. So, of course, unless you have Altar of Death, which is why I think that Arnim Zola is a great choice for Altar of Death featured location day, because you get the extra energy, which allows you to play more expensive cards. Not well, yeah, more expensive cards, but also just more expensive cards in your deck. And Arnim Zola is also good because it can throw cards into the Altar of Death, which could otherwise be a tricky location to win in. So my opponent's snapping here on turn 2 because they are obviously a Destroy deck, and if you played at all in the past 24 hours, you probably saw a ton of Destroy yourself. I wasn't sure, and I was kind of surprised that there wasn't more hate for Destroy decks, and that not everybody else was playing them. Here, I think about playing Deadpool. Sorry, I kind of got distracted because I wanted to say something about this turn. I think about playing Deadpool Killmonger, but I ultimately realized that if my opponent's playing Deadpool and they're going to have priority on the final turn, I want to save my Killmonger. So I realized that there is a chance that my opponent was just going to play Killmonger this turn themselves. If they had it, it would make a lot of sense to play it. However, I just wanted to play it safe, blow up my rocks, and I don't really care about priority. What I care about is not having priority even, so that way I can play Killmonger on the final turn of the game and blow up my opponent's Deadpool, and then use Arnim Zola on either Deadpool or Venom to get the better of my opponent. So the point that I was kind of trying to make is that because there were so many people playing Destroy decks, I was a little bit afraid that people would bring more hate, that we would see more armor and other interesting ways to interact with Altar of Death, primarily location change effects I thought would be really common. That's the reason I didn't want to go for just something wacky and wild where you're all in on finding Altar of Death. And we're gonna look at some opponents that went a little bit further than I did, just changing one small card. But we'll see how that works for them, because in the mirror matches, I think that is where you get a huge advantage, where both players are just saying, okay, let's try to destroy as many things as we can in the featured location. If somebody's leaning into that a little bit harder, then they can probably come out on top with it. So this turn, I'm just gonna play a bunch of stuff into Altar of Death, so that way I have a bunch of bonus energy for the final turn of the game. Blowing up X23 in this will mean that I will have at least 13 energy on the final turn, which will allow me to play Arnim Zola, Knull, and Deadpool. And if we can blow up the X23 multiple times here, no, I guess there's no way where we'd be able to play Knull and Arnim Zola and the X23, but we do blow up X23 twice in this with our Venom and our Deathlok, so we will ultimately wind up with 14 energy on the final turn, so maybe there would be a way to weave Killmonger in here regardless. But we do also have to beat my opponent's Knull. They played out an earlier Knull, so I kind of just want to go Knull, Arnim Zola here, and that's kind of the point of this video and point of this deck, is just to say that in the mirror matches, I think that this is what you want to do. I would have liked to have played Killmonger here, but unfortunately it's just not possible. So what I'm instead going to do is play out my 1-cost cards here first into Altar of Death, just to make both of these Knulls slightly bigger, and then I'll play Knull and I'll Arnim Zola it. I think this is still a fantastic final turn of the game, and should be able to beat whatever my opponent comes up with. We're just saying, okay, you win this Knull location, but I'm going to win both of the other two. They actually do have themselves a Arnim Zola, but in this match, the most important thing is just keeping one of your locations clear, so that way you can Arnim Zola your Knull with a guaranteed percentage here. They probably should have played the Arnim Zola and then played their Deadpool, and they're getting a little bit punished for that. And the other interesting thing there is my X23 could have flipped over into location 3, which would have put me in an awkward position, but it didn't, so we are good. And we're gonna take a look at 2 more games now where we're gonna see my opponents trying a little bit bigger things for the featured location. In this game, my opponent Spider-Man emotes me on turn 1, so it's kind of making me think that, and they've got a Knull avatar here, I think that they're probably playing Destroy, and they potentially saw my video or posts yesterday and were indicating that they know that I am also playing Destroy. Otherwise, I'm not sure how they confidently Spider-Man emote turn 1, or maybe we had played like a little bit before that and I just didn't recognize their username. That's also definitely possible. Turn 2 rather, I forge up a Deadpool, and then turn 3 we find Altar of Death, so I'm going to throw Killmonger in there and pick my Deadpool back up, and we'll just start making that huge in Altar of Death. I definitely have a huge advantage with a bigger Deadpool than my opponent right now, and I also have an advantage because my opponent's Wolverine and X-23 are going to wind up giving them priority, which is now super important because my opponent has the Killmonger still and I don't. So I want to make sure that I keep my opponent with priority going into the final turn, and Dark Dimension can also make that super possible. So there is definitely some fancy footwork that we can do yet with this game. I'm just kind of trying to figure out what I want to do with this Venom and this Carnage, and basically, oh yeah, Iron Lad is a sweet card. I tried to react to the Iron Lad here and tap it, but I couldn't do that. But I thought that Iron Lad was a really interesting choice that could allow you to find your Arnim Zola and Knull. So yeah, I just wind up going for the thumbs up icon there. I think Arnim Zola is pretty sweet, but then my opponent also has Nimrod. So like I said, they are going like slightly bigger even into the Altar of Death to try out some more interesting synergies. I just play Carnage on turn 4, partially to set myself up with additional energy, but then the other thing that it does is allows me to potentially try to find Wolverine. Like if I were able to pick up Wolverine that turn and just get a slightly bigger Wolverine, I thought that that might have been interesting. And then on turn 5, I'm just going to play Deadpool and then Venom, with the idea that this gives me a little bit of additional energy going into the final turn of the game, which would allow me to play Deadpool, Hulkbuster, Arnim Zola, all in Dark Dimension, which would give me a big Deadpool in Altar of Death and Monster Island. But when my opponent plays Deathlok into Altar of Death on this turn, that really says something interesting to me, because they could have played Deathlok into either of their Nimrod locations. So what this says to me is my opponent is setting up for something spicy on the final turn of the game. So I've got to outspice them. And if I just play Deadpool, Hulkbuster, Arnim Zola into Dark Dimension, that does set me up for plus 29 power in both of those side locations, but I think it would actually lose me the game. So instead, I'm going to do something a little bit cheekier here, and I'm going to change this order around slightly. This is a little bit more all-in to go for this specific order, but I think that it is ultimately the right play, because if you are not familiar with what my opponent is trying to do, one really powerful way to take over the mirror matches and to just have a strong deck in general for this featured location is to play Galactus. So my opponent is going to Galactus, and they are going to get their X-23 and a pair of Nimrods into Altar of Death, but they won't get their Wolverine over into Altar of Death, but I will get mine. And that is why it is important that I sequence my cards in the order that I did, because now what is going to happen is my opponent's Galactus is going to destroy itself, and then Hulkbuster is going to equip itself to Wolverine. That'll be 11 and then 13 power, which means I am very, very close to now actually winning in Altar of Death. Arnim Zola will destroy Wolverine and just send it back to the only location where it can go. So that's a win, and X-23 is the cherry on top. My opponent, a good sport there that I was able to get the read and correctly predict that Galactus, saving myself some cubes. So I thought that was a sweet one there, and just shows a little bit about how players were like one-upping each other in the featured location. And again, that's why I thought like just putting Arnim Zola into the deck still kind of can one-up some people, but also the deck is still coherent. I think that you could play this deck today. I don't think it's as good as my list yesterday. I think that you might still want to cut Hulkbuster for Death. However, Hulkbuster, Arnim Zola, Taskmaster, Knull, and Death All 5 of those cards, I would say, are payoff cards, where the other 9 cards in the deck are setup cards. So mixing around which 3 payoff cards you ultimately decide to play, as long as you play some number of payoffs, they all have some amount of high rolly in them. Scar, also kind of a payoff, and is also kind of high rolly. I think that you really can't go wrong with any of those options. This game we also have Titan, which is a great location for the Arnim Zola version of the deck, and I briefly considered, should I play Arnim Zola? Because Titan was the featured location only like a week ago. And I did consider playing this deck with Arnim Zola in it when Titan was the featured location, but ultimately just decided I was probably better off in Conquest that day. But yeah, I thought that that's definitely a good featured location for us. And Asgard, we're actually going to make work pretty well for me too. With Forge into Killmonger, I will have 10 power over an Asgard, which I don't see my opponent beating on just 1 turn's worth of plays, even with Altar of Death. I just don't think it's possible. So I'm going to snap on this Asgardian turn, and we'll have 2 additional cards. And then we've got additional cards, and Altar of Death is providing us with all of the extra energy. So I think things are kind of looking up here for me. My opponent is going to play Nico plus Venom, and Wolverine is going to land over into the Altar of Death. So my opponent does have priority here, excuse me, which ultimately I think is pretty important, but we get to play a whole bunch of cards into Altar of Death here. So I think this is pretty dang good for us too, and will allow me to set up for a big final turn. As long as you can play 3 cards into Altar of Death, actually you only need to play 2 cards into Altar of Death in a Titan game, but either way, that will allow you to play Knull plus Arnim Zola on the final turn of the game, which I think is the only important thing here. I play X-23 and then I play Hulkbuster with the idea that like maybe Hulkbuster could attach to X-23, which could be cute. However, my opponent has Professor X, so they are locking down Altar of Death, and I think this is another card that people could have or should have been playing with Altar of Death as the featured location to just take over the location. It takes over the location, so it wins you a location, and it shuts the location off for your opponents playing Destroy, and you can get it out as early as turn 2 with a turn 1 X-23 into Altar of Death. You've got 5 energy on the second turn of the game, which can mean a turn 2 Professor X. However, in this game, I was planning on dumping a bunch of stuff into Altar of Death, which means I've now won that location, which now means I only have to win 1 more location to win the game. So I'm just going to continue to battle for Asgard. I don't think my opponent has got it, and if they can come up with something crazy, then that'll grow my Knull and we'll be able to win in Titan. So there you go. That is all that I wanted to showcase here today with this Arnim Zola build of the deck. Like I said, I do still think that this build is good with Death in it, but this was a lot of fun, and I think showed some definite high roll potential of Arnim Zola that you were all probably aware of, that it's like a high roll card, but it was also just able to be a pretty consistent card for me, even in those games where it low rolled. That's going to be it for me today. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.